Leonard Voss had been farming the same 720 acres in Custer County, Nebraska since 1987. He was 58 years old. His father had bought the land in 1961, and Leonard had taken it over at 22 when his father's health had declined. He had farmed it through drought years and flood years and commodity crashes and input spikes and every other thing that the plains could throw at a man trying to grow corn and wheat on a fixed piece of ground. He had made it work for 37 years through a combination of skill and stubbornness and a willingness to outwork every problem until the problem went away. The foreclosure was different. The foreclosure was not something he could outwork. He had been trying for 18 months, and every morning he woke up, the numbers were the same, and the bank's position was the same, and the outcome was becoming more clear whether Leonard wanted to see it or not. The trouble had started in 2021, a bad corn year followed by an equipment failure that cost $63,000 at the worst possible time. Leonard had borrowed against the operating line to cover it. Then 2022 had been average at best, and the operating line hadn't been paid down the way it needed to be. Then, input costs had spiked in 2023, and Leonard had gone deeper into the line to plant. By the fall of 2023, he owed $412,000 on an operating line that his primary lender, First Consolidated Agricultural Bank in Broken Bow, had been comfortable carrying at $200,000 2 years earlier. The loan officer, a man named Garrett, who had worked with Leonard for 16 years, had called him in October 2023 and said the bank needed to have a serious conversation. Leonard had driven to Broken Bow and sat across from Garrett and listened to the numbers. The debt service coverage ratio had fallen below 1. The collateral value of the equipment and the land was still sufficient to secure the outstanding balance, but the bank's credit committee was not comfortable extending further credit or rolling the operating line again without a concrete plan for reduction. Garrett had said the word restructuring several times. Leonard had heard the word foreclosure underneath it, even when Garrett wasn't saying it. Leonard had spent the winter of 2023 to 2024 trying to find a path. He had sold the older of his 2 combines, a 2015 machine he had been planning to run for 2 more years. He had sold 30 acres on the eastern boundary to a neighbor for $106,000. He had cut his input budget for 2024 to the bone, dropping fertilizer rates and switching to cheaper seed varieties. He had taken on a part-time job driving a grain truck for a larger operation nearby 3 days a week. He had done every single thing a man could do short of selling the farm itself. And by February 2024, he had reduced the operating line balance from $412,000 to $347,000. Garrett had called again in February and said the reduction was noted and appreciated, but the bank's credit committee still considered the exposure too high relative to the farm's demonstrated cash flow. They were requiring a further reduction of at least $100,000 by May 1st, or they would begin foreclosure proceedings. Leonard had asked for more time. Garrett had said May 1st was the committee's position, and he did not have authority to extend it. Marcus Voss was 26 years old. He had grown up on the farm. He had worked alongside his father every summer from the time he was old enough to sit on a tractor without falling off. He had gone to the University of Nebraska for 2 years, studied agricultural business, and come back to the farm when it became clear his father needed consistent help. He had been working full-time on the operation since he was 21, drawing a modest salary that left him plenty of room to save. He lived in a small house on the farm property that his grandfather had originally built as a hired hand's quarters. He drove a used truck. He ate most meals at his father's kitchen table. He had no significant expenses and a genuine purpose in the work he was doing. And over 5 years, he had accumulated $48,000 in savings that sat in a money market account at a credit union in Broken Bow. This money was the product of 5 years of discipline and patience. Marcus thought of it as his foundation, the thing he would use eventually to begin his own stake in the farm, to buy equipment or land, or to provide operating capital when the operation eventually transitioned to him. He had never touched it. He thought about it sometimes at night, the way young people think about the future, as a kind of potential energy waiting to be directed. Marcus knew about the foreclosure situation. His father had not hidden it from him, though Leonard had not invited detailed discussion either. Leonard was the kind of man who dealt with problems by managing them silently, and he believed that worrying his son before there was a resolution to share was pointless. But Marcus had ears. He had heard the phone calls. He had seen the financial statements on the kitchen table. He had driven his father to Broken Bow in October and waited in the truck while Leonard went into the bank. He had watched his father come out with the expression of a man who has received information he had been trying not to hear. Marcus had not asked directly what had been said. Leonard had not offered. But Marcus knew the shape of what was happening. He knew his father was fighting to keep a farm that the numbers were slowly pulling away from him. He knew the May 1st deadline existed. And in March 2024, while his father was driving a grain truck 3 days a week, and Marcus was running the farm alone on the other days, Marcus made a decision. He had been thinking about efficiency for months. The farm's equipment situation was a genuine operational problem, independent of the financial pressure. Leonard's main tractor was a 2011 Massey Ferguson 8690. It had 9,400 hours on it. It ran, but it ran with the mechanical uncertainty of a machine that had been worked hard for 13 years. The hydraulics were slow. The CVT had been serviced twice in the past 3 years at significant cost. The fuel consumption was higher than it should have been because the engine was past its optimal efficiency curve. Marcus had calculated that the old 8690 was costing the farm somewhere between $12,000 and $18,000 per year in extra fuel and maintenance compared to what a modern machine would cost to operate. Beyond the direct costs, the machine's unreliability was a planning problem. You could not commit to custom work contracts, which paid premium rates, if your primary tractor might need a 48-hour repair at any moment during the critical window. The farm was leaving money on the table because it could not be counted on. Marcus had run the numbers 6 different ways, and the conclusion was the same every time. A new high-horsepower tractor would not just reduce costs. It would open revenue streams that the old equipment made impossible to access reliably. Custom planting, custom tillage, contracts with neighbors who paid by the acre for reliable, timely work. Marcus had identified 4 neighbors within 15 miles who were using custom operators from outside the county because there was no reliable local capacity. He had talked to 2 of them informally. They had said if there was a dependable local operator with a modern machine, they would prefer to keep the money in the county. Marcus had done the math. 200 additional custom acres per year at $35 per acre was $7,000. 300 acres was $10,500. If he could build to 400 custom acres in year 2, that was $14,000 in new revenue on top of the farm's own operations. It was not a guaranteed plan, but it was a real one. A Massey Ferguson 8S265 was the machine that made it possible. He had priced it out. New was beyond reach. But a 2022 model with low hours was available at a dealer in Grand Island for $238,000. His $48,000 as a deposit would get him financed at current rates with a monthly payment of $3,900. The custom work revenue would cover most of the payment. The fuel and maintenance savings would cover the rest. In year 2, if the custom work grew as he projected, the machine would be net positive to the operation. Marcus had not told his father. He had thought about telling him several times and had decided against it each time. Leonard would say no. Leonard would say the farm did not need more debt. Leonard would say the timing was wrong. Leonard would say all of the things that a man under financial pressure says when someone proposes spending money, even when the spending is justified by a coherent plan. Marcus had watched his father fight the foreclosure battle for 18 months, and he had watched his father do it alone, making sacrifices, selling assets, working extra jobs, trying to solve a systemic problem with individual effort. Marcus believed his father was solving the wrong part of the problem. Reducing debt was necessary, but not sufficient. What the farm needed was more revenue, and more revenue required better capability, and better capability required investment. The $48,000 in his savings account was the investment. He drove to Grand Island on a Thursday in late March and sat down with the dealer. He explained the situation without mentioning the foreclosure. He said the farm was expanding its custom work capacity and needed a reliable, high-horsepower machine. The salesman was professional and thorough. They worked through the financing options. Marcus's credit was clean. He had no outstanding debt. The approval came back the same afternoon. He put down the $48,000. He signed the papers. The Massey Ferguson 8S.265 was scheduled for delivery on April 15th. Marcus drove home, feeling a combination of certainty and fear that he had never felt before. He was 26 years old, and he had just committed his entire savings to a plan he had not shared with his father. He told himself he would tell Leonard when the machine arrived. He would arrive with the tractor and the plan and the numbers, and Leonard would see it. Leonard had to see it. Leonard found out about the bank's final decision on April 14th. Garrett called at 8 in the morning. He said the credit committee had met the previous afternoon and reviewed the farm's account. The reduction Leonard had achieved since February was acknowledged. The total balance was now $311,000, but the committee's position was unchanged. They required $100,000 in additional reduction by May 1st, and Leonard had not provided a credible plan for achieving it. Garrett said the bank was proceeding with foreclosure proceedings effective May 1st. He said Leonard would receive formal written notice by end of business that day. He said he was sorry. He said he had advocated for more time, but the committee's decision was final. Leonard thanked him and hung up. He sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he went to the window and looked out at the farm. The fields were ready for planting. The soil temperature had been right for a week. Under different circumstances, this would have been one of the best planting windows he had seen in years. Leonard went to the window and looked at it for a long time. Then he went to his office and started making a list of what would need to happen next. Marcus was in the equipment shed when his phone rang. It was the dealer in Grand Island. The driver who was delivering the Massey Ferguson 8S.265 was on the road and would arrive the following morning between 9 and 11. Marcus confirmed the address and thanked him. He put the phone in his pocket and stood in the shed for a moment. He had planned to tell his father tonight. He had been building toward the conversation all day. He walked to the farmhouse and found Leonard at the kitchen table with papers spread in front of him. Leonard's face told the story before he said a word. Marcus sat down across from him. Leonard told him about Garrett's call. He told him the foreclosure was proceeding from May 1st. He told him they had 17 days on the farm. Leonard's voice was controlled the way a man's voice is controlled when he has already moved past the shock into the practical phase. He was listing things: what to tell the grain elevator, what to do with the livestock, what equipment would be seized, and what was personally owned. Marcus listened to all of it. When Leonard finished, Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said he had something to tell him. He told his father about the Massey Ferguson. He told him about the deposit. He told him about the delivery scheduled for the following morning. He told him about the custom work plan and the revenue projections and the logic that had seemed so sound 3 weeks ago. Leonard listened without interrupting. When Marcus finished, Leonard looked at his son across the kitchen table. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said the $48,000 was gone. Marcus said yes. Leonard said that money was 7 years of Marcus's work. Marcus said yes. Leonard said the tractor was arriving tomorrow. Marcus said yes. Leonard stood up from the table and walked to the window and looked at the farm. He did not say anything else that evening. The flatbed from Grand Island arrived at 9:47 on the morning of April 15th. Marcus was in the yard when it came down the road. He had been there since 8, unable to do anything else. The truck pulled into the driveway and stopped. The driver climbed down and introduced himself and started setting up the ramps. The Massey Ferguson 8S.265 was on the trailer, red and massive and factory fresh. It was a beautiful machine. Under any other circumstances, it would have been one of the best mornings of Marcus's farming life. He stood and watched the driver prepare to unload it. He heard the farmhouse door open behind him. He did not turn around. He heard his father's boots on the gravel. Leonard came and stood beside him. They both looked at the tractor on the trailer. The driver asked if they were ready. Marcus said yes. The driver started the engine, and the Massey Ferguson came off the trailer slowly, the ramps flexing under the weight, the big tires finding the gravel of the driveway. The machine descended and settled onto the farm ground. The driver shut it down and handed Marcus the keys and the documentation. Marcus signed for it. The driver got back in the truck and drove away. Marcus and Leonard stood in the driveway and looked at the tractor. The foreclosure notice from First Consolidated Agricultural Bank was on the kitchen table inside, received by certified mail the previous afternoon, as Garrett had promised. 17 days. Leonard took the keys from Marcus's hand. He looked at them for a moment, the Massey Ferguson key fob, new and clean. Then he walked to the tractor. He climbed the steps. He settled into the cab. Marcus watched from the driveway. He could see his father through the glass, sitting in the seat, looking at the controls, the GPS display, the dashboard. Leonard sat there for maybe 2 minutes. Then he started the engine. The 8S265 came to life with a deep, authoritative sound. Leonard let it warm for a moment. Then he drove it out of the driveway and into the field. Marcus watched him go. The big tractor moved through the gate and into the east section, the section that needed to be planted first. Leonard dropped the guidance system into the first row and started moving. Marcus stood in the driveway and watched his father plant in the Massey Ferguson 8S265 on April 15, 2024, 17 days before the bank was scheduled to take everything. He watched for a long time. Then he went to the shed and got the planter ready to hook up. If they were going to plant this farm one more time, they were going to plant it right. They planted for 17 days. Leonard drove the Massey Ferguson from early morning until dark. Marcus managed the seed and the planter and the logistics. They did not talk much about the foreclosure. They did not talk much about the money. They planted. The 8S ran exactly as Marcus had believed it would, smooth and precise and powerful. The GPS held lines in the heavy ground without deviation. The fuel consumption was measurably better than the old 8690, even at full load. The cab was quiet enough that Leonard could hear himself think, which he did a great deal of during those 17 days. He thought about 37 years on this land. He thought about his father who had bought it and his son who had spent his savings on a tractor to try to save it. He thought about Garrett and the credit committee and the numbers that had become a wall he could not get over. He thought about a lot of things while the Massey Ferguson moved up and down the rows in the Nebraska spring, but mostly he just farmed, because that was what he knew how to do, and it was all he had left to offer the land before it was taken. On April 29th, 2 days before the May 1st foreclosure date, Leonard received a phone call that he had not expected. It was not from Garrett. It was from a man named Holt, who identified himself as a senior vice president at First Consolidated's regional office in Omaha. Holt said he had been reviewing the Voss account as part of a portfolio audit. He said he had some questions. Leonard said he would answer them. Holt asked about the equipment change Leonard had made in mid-April. The telematics data from the new Massey Ferguson had been flagged in the bank's collateral monitoring system because it was a new piece of equipment registered to the farm that had not been disclosed to the bank. Holt said the machine appeared to have $48,000 in documented equity above the financing amount, which represented new collateral that had not been factored into the credit committee's February analysis. Leonard said his son had purchased the tractor with his personal savings. Holt was quiet for a moment. He asked what Leonard's son's involvement in the operation was. Leonard explained. Marcus had worked full-time on the farm for 5 years. He was not a secondary operator. He was effectively a co-manager. Holt asked if Marcus had a formal equity position in the farm. Leonard said no, not formally. Holt said that was worth discussing. He said the bank's credit committee, typically viewed multi-generational succession as a positive factor in long-term loan viability. He said the addition of a young, debt-free operator with demonstrated commitment, evidenced by the personal capital investment, was a meaningful change in the farm's risk profile. He said he was not making any commitments on behalf of the credit committee, but he believed the situation warranted a fresh review before May 1st. He asked if Leonard and Marcus could come to Omaha the following morning. Leonard said yes. They drove to Omaha on April 30th. They sat in a conference room with Holt and two other bank officers and Leonard's lawyer and went through everything. Marcus had spent the previous evening preparing a presentation. It was not elaborate. It was the same analysis he had done before buying the tractor, clean and careful, with realistic assumptions and documented comparables for the custom work revenue projections. He walked through it for 40 minutes. Holt and the other officers asked questions. Marcus answered them. Leonard watched his son present the case for the farm's future and felt something shift in his chest that he could not name precisely. They left the meeting without a decision. Holt said the committee would meet that afternoon. Holt called at 5:47 p.m. on April 30th. He said the committee had agreed to a restructuring. The terms were not everything Leonard had hoped for. The bank would extend the operating line at a reduced credit limit. The interest rate would remain the same. The repayment schedule would be adjusted to reflect realistic cash flow projections, including the custom work revenue, which the committee had accepted as credible based on Marcus's documentation. Leonard would be required to formally add Marcus as a co-operator with documented equity participation within 60 days. The farm was not saved in any permanent sense. The debt was still real and the margin was still thin, but the foreclosure was suspended. Leonard had more time. He called Marcus. Marcus was sitting in the truck in the parking garage because he had not been able to make himself drive home. He answered immediately. Leonard told him. Marcus said nothing for a long time. Then he said he was glad the presentation had been useful. Leonard said it was more than useful. Marcus asked what he meant. Leonard said he meant that the tractor and the plan and the presentation and the commitment that all of it represented had done something that Leonard's year and a half of fighting alone had not been able to do. It had changed the bank's assessment of who was farming the land and what the future of that land looked like. Marcus said he should have told Leonard before he did it. Leonard said yes, he should have. He said there was a lot they should talk about. Marcus said he knew. Leonard said, "Come home." Marcus drove home. The Massey Ferguson 8S265 is still on the Voss farm in Custer County, Nebraska. Marcus runs it every day during the planting and tillage seasons. The custom work operation grew faster than his projections. In the first full season, he cut 280 custom acres for 3 neighbors. The following year, 410 acres for 5 clients. The revenue is real, and it is growing. The farm's financial situation is not comfortable. The debt is still there, and the margin is still thin, and every year requires full attention. But the foreclosure did not happen. The land that Leonard Voss's father bought in 1961 is still in the family. Leonard and Marcus farm it together now with a formal partnership agreement that Marcus's lawyer drafted in July 2024. Leonard's name is on the land. Marcus's name is on the operating agreement. The Massey Ferguson 8S.265 is in both their names. Marcus's $48,000 is gone. He will not see it again in any direct sense. What he has instead is a farm he helped save and a partnership with his father and a tractor that showed a bank that the future of the operation was not an aging man fighting alone, but a young man willing to bet everything he had on the land his grandfather had bought. Leonard does not talk about the foreclosure much. But sometimes in the evening when he is walking the farm after the work is done, he stops and looks at the Massey Ferguson parked in the shed. He looks at it for a long time. He thinks about the morning it arrived. He thinks about the foreclosure notice on the table inside and the tractor coming off the trailer and himself taking the keys from his son's hand and driving it into the field. He had not said anything to Marcus that morning because there was nothing adequate to say. His son had spent 7 years of savings on a machine that arrived the day the bank said it was over. And Leonard had taken the keys and planted the field, because that was the only response that made any sense. You farm the land as long as you have it. And sometimes, if you are fortunate, someone who loves the land as much as you do finds a way to give you more time.